Hello, my name is Annalise Dezak, and I'm going to present to you Chapter 5 on Becoming a Shock from the text Coercion and Its Fallout by Murray Sidman. Some uses of punishment. Individuals have utilized punishment procedures throughout the course of human history for different reasons. Some have used these procedures in an attempt to seek revenge for what they perceive as wrongdoing. And certain examples of this type of punishment would be things like terrorism, property destruction, and murder. Some have used these procedures in an attempt to decrease what they consider to be undesired behaviors. And some examples of punishment in this regard can include things like spanking, verbal reprimands, and other penalizations. Why do we still use punishment? A good paraphrase from the text that I had found was, regardless of individual MO for utilizing punishment, the most frequently given explanation for such implementation is to gain control over the undesired behavior itself. There are non-coercive methods and coercive methods to utilizing punishment. Non-coercive methods include things such as mild punishment with positive reinforcement. The pros of this is that it can accomplish the same outcomes in reducing the undesired behavior, as well as having a lower chance of potential side effects from punishment. Cons to this, I wouldn't necessarily consider them cons, but reasons why not as many people use them is that it's not as easy to apply in the moment, and it's typically not as quick as intensive punishment at reducing undesired behaviors. That does not mean it doesn't have the same effect or that it can have a better effect, but that it's usually not as quick as people want it to be, making a much more committed process. Then there are coercive methods, which involve intensive punishment. I don't consider these pros myself, but reasons why people tend to lean towards this type of punishment in terms of behavior reduction is that it does not take much skill or critical thinking to implement, and it often reduces undesired behaviors in a swift manner. Cons to this is that it can inadvertently reduce desired behaviors in the process, and it can also cancel out the benefits of target behavior reduction itself. Punishment has side effects. Hammurabi's Code. This was an ancient code of physicians that used coercive methods to ensure the quality of their physician's practice. This code entailed that whatever outcome a patient had due to their physician's treatment would be the outcome of the physician as well. For example, if a patient lost an extremity in the process of being treated, then the treating physician would lose that same extremity as punishment for failed treatment. In turn, some physicians increased the quality of their treatment, though many also started to avoid treating certain patients who they believed would not succeed with treatment, even to alleviate their pain, due to the fear of coercive consequences. So even if a patient came in, death was known, and they just needed quality of life at that point during their time of passing, they would often be turned away due to the fact that if you treat them and they die and you don't cure their impending death in this sense, then death would be the fate of the treating physician. So the majority of these physicians ultimately became too fearful to practice in any capacity, despite the goal of this code being to increase better quality of treatment and practices of physicians. So it's kind of a paradox in that the behavior of treating patients started to be seen as an aversive stimulus when the whole goal was to increase quality patient service. So, and then a quote that I had found that I felt was relevant was, "The vast catalog of punishment side effects, consequences that cancel out its benefits, are responsible for much of what is wrong with our social systems." More on punishment side effects. So, modern research on the effects of punishment. Current literature suggests the use of mild punishment in combination with positive reinforcement for effective behavioral change over punishment procedures. And by that, I mean specifically intensive punishment, coercive versus non-coercive. Research also discourages against the use of punishment unless absolutely necessary, specifically due to the side effects that can be produced in the process. Research has also been conducted in labs to determine the adverse consequences of using coercive methods for behavioral change. This provides a logical and behaviorally sound account for all of the consequences that have been provided. And both experimental and non-experimental studies based on behavior analysis have concluded that a major side effect of punishment involve what are known as conditioned punishers. And then another quote that I liked and found relevant was over here to the left. Punishment and other forms of coercion, like many drugs, have been introduced into our culture without adequate testing. So it's almost like no wonder so many people think that beating their kids will just make them behave. All right, conditioned punishers. The biggest side effect of punishment, the biggest emphasis of this chapter. So conditioned punishers are stimuli that were once perceived as neutral, so neither good or bad by the responder, and are present during punishing procedures. Some examples of conditioned punishers can include that of seeing an F on an academic assignment or hearing the word no when you ask for something. While these are merely letters and sounds prior to any conditioning, when they're conditioned in the presence of other aversive stimuli or punishment, their presence ends up being a punisher as well. So this can transpire to the avoidance of this as a signal of punishment when associated stimuli are present, even when punishment is not applicable or available. So an example would be a student who is constantly reprimanded in front of his peers may begin to see the environment in which this occurs as a worsening set of conditions, even when the teacher is not around. This can lead to further maladaptive behaviors, such as skipping school entirely, or the extinguishing of desired behaviors, such as attending during a lesson. New punishers, from bad to worse. So new punishers in this sense are the conditioned punishers, punishers that were not once there, but due to intensive punishment and coercive methods have become conditioned punishers themselves. They can go from bad to even worse. Once conditioned punishers have been established, there are still instances in which punishment contingencies are temporarily suspended, however. These are points in time where there are no signals for punishment. These are instances in which an individual who has only been punished for undesired behavior, rather than the utilization of mild punishment with combination with positive reinforcement. So if they are not fearful of punishment at that moment as a potential consequence, they are much more likely to engage in these behaviors when that stimulus is not around. This is because once we have learned which scenarios lead to the delay and or reinforcement of both reinforcement and punishment, we end up taking advantage of any and all opportunities in which punishment contingencies are suspended. An example would be of two divorced parents. One has punished you for cursing, and therefore you avoid using these words around them, while the other parent has never punished you for cursing. So when you visit that parent, your cursing behavior returns due to the absence of conditioned punishers and suspended punishment contingencies. So the signal for punishment would either be the parent who has punished you before, the house in which it happened, the situations leading up to it, etc. When these things are absent, we typically revert back to the behaviors that we engaged in before because we aren't avoiding them, we aren't engaging in them because we've learned to act differently. We avoid acting in that way only in that present. So another good paraphrase I found was, conditioned punishers and their ability to make us stop doing something is conditional on other circumstances. So just like with this situation, if the parent isn't around that hates your cussing, and your other parent doesn't care, you're likely not going to just not cuss at that point. So there is huge significance of conditioned punishment. Another good quote I found was, conditioned punishment is a more widespread side effect of punishment than any single demonstration can possibly demonstrate. That is some pretty intense stuff. So punishment as a go-to for behavior reduction is still frequently used across the world. Even with attempts at punishment that are arguably more humane than those used in older times, such as with the Hammurabi's Code, these attempts still bring about the risk of creating more punishers within the individual's environment. Furthermore, punishment's initial side effect is to lend any stimuli that is seen as a signal for punishment the ability to be seen as a punisher as well. Sidman explains that this is a major concern, as with each new punishing stimulus that is added to our environment, the quality of our lives as we perceive it decreases, and we are left more unsatisfied with our environments as a whole. This can lead to individuals who frequently experience punishment to do as little as possible just to avoid said punishment. This can also shape an individual to be more susceptible to further methods of coercive control within their environment, while creating potential dependency on counter-coercive methods that are taught in order to quote-unquote survive. Conditioned punishers on their own can produce the same additional side effects as the punishers from which they originally derived. So again, they end up being punishers themselves. So some conclusions from the text is that Sidman gives many examples on the utilization of punishment, which is a method of coercion, how it often produces side effects that end up doing more harm than good in the pursuit of meaningful behavioral change. The side effect discussed in this chapter involved that of conditioned punishers. Just as with learning contingencies for reinforcers within our new environments, we quickly learn contingencies for punishment within our environments as well. We actively avoid these behaviors, but only when necessary, and it is important to refrain from intensive punishment to avoid creating and/or becoming a conditioned punisher yourself. So the open-ended question that I came up with involved that of having to create a punishment procedure regardless of the circumstances, in that you do it in the best, most humane way possible. So while punishment procedures are not highly recommended per the literature of behavior analysis, there are some instances in which it is necessary for both the reduction of behaviors that are of clinical significance in frequency, magnitude, or both, like self-injury, aggression, and other behaviors that pose a danger to the individual or others. As mentioned, there are non-coercive methods for behavior reduction that are held in high regard when it comes to creating the same outcome with less risks and side effects, typically involving some form of differential reinforcement in combination with a punishment procedure if needed. In this case, in a case such as this, how might you as a practitioner go about planning an intervention that uses a punishment procedure on the undesired behavior while, 1, keeping the risk for conditioned punishers low, and 2, keeping the student's MO for using a replacement behavior high? Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it lends some insight into coercion in the form of punishment and how conditioned punishers can end up making things a lot worse. And I hope everybody has a great night. Thank you.